They say trucks die at the worst time mine did, sputtering out right in front of a garage that looked held together by hope and rust. Jace Holloway, here 29, recently jobless, clutching a coffee-stained resume and a free gas station pen like it meant something. Ever met someone who fixes more than just engines? Tell me, would you trust a stranger in grease-stained boots with your worst day? Jace Holloway's old Ford pickup chose the worst possible time to die right in front of a garage that looked more like a tool shed than a business. He had just come from the hardware store, a bag of mismatched screws and drywall anchors still rattling on the passenger seat. The morning sun skimmed low across Elkhorn's sleepy streets, throwing long shadows of mailboxes and flagpoles across cracked pavement. The truck made one last, tired wheeze before falling silent right outside a squat one-room structure with peeling white siding and a garage bay that hadn't been repainted since the Reagan era. Jace sat still for a second, gripping the steering wheel like it might suddenly remember how to run. Then he popped the hood and climbed out, releasing a puff of steam and his own breath into the crisp Nebraska air. The garage door stayed shut. A faded license plate hung above it, rusted nearly illegible, except for the embossed date Keller's service, since 1968. Just below it, swaying gently in the breeze, was an old military dog tag, the kind you'd see in movies or on keychains of men trying to forget things they couldn't. Jace rubbed his hands together and muttered, "Great. Ghost Town Garage." A dog barked somewhere behind the diner across the road, followed by the soft clang of a tool hitting metal. Then came footsteps, measured, deliberate. From around the corner of the garage, a woman appeared. She was in her early 60s, lean-built, with steel-gray hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid. Her boots were scuffed, her flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, and there was a streak of grease across one cheek, like war paint that had been there long enough to forget. "You need help?" she asked, voice even unreadable. Jace blinked. Yeah. I think it's the starter or, I don't know, it just stopped." She didn't reply. She stepped up to the hood, gave the engine a glance like it had personally disappointed her, and reached into her back pocket for a rag. Her hands moved with a precision that made him step back instinctively, as though he might be in the way. "Battery cable's loose," she said after a moment, "and corroded." "Hold this." Jace found himself gripping the flashlight she handed over without argument. In less than 2 minutes, she scraped, twisted, and resecured the connection. When she told him to turn the key, the truck roared back to life like it had only needed her permission. He cut the engine and stepped out. That was quick. "Thank you, seriously." She wiped her hands on the rag and gave a small nod. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, already pulling his wallet from his jacket. "Nothing." "I mean, at least let me—" She met his eyes, and something about her expression made him stop. "Don't worry about it," she said simply. "Just glad you didn't have to walk." Jace hesitated, hand still holding a folded 20. She was already turning back toward the garage. "What's your name?" he called. She paused at the threshold, glanced over her shoulder. "May." Then she disappeared into the dim interior, where the overhead light flickered on with a quiet hum. Jace stood for a moment, wallet still open in his hand, before slowly sliding the bill back in. He pulled into Patty's Porch Diner a few minutes later. The place hadn't changed in 20 years, still the same red leather booths, the same laminated menus curling at the corners, and the same 4 retirees parked at the window table like sentries of memory. The jukebox was playing Johnny Cash low enough not to interrupt conversation, and the smell of bacon grease hung in the air like a welcome mat. He took a seat near the window, unsure what unsettled him more, how fast May had fixed the truck, or how she'd refused the money like it was offensive to suggest it. Patty Green herself came over with a coffee pot in one hand and a smile that hadn't changed since Jace was in high school. "Well, look what the road dragged back," he grinned. "Just passing through. Thought I'd grab breakfast. You want your usual—" "Sure, if you remember it. Hash browns, eggs, scrambled, no onions." "Still got it," he said, impressed. She poured the coffee, then tilted her head toward the garage across the street. "May fix you up?" Jace nodded slowly. "Yeah. Didn't charge me either." Patty made a quiet sound as she refilled another cup. "She's fixed more lives than trucks, that one." That stuck with him. Long after she left and the food arrived, Jace found himself staring out the window fork halfway to his mouth, mind spinning. Through the glass across the quiet street, something caught his eye. Just beneath the garage awning, nestled between stacked tires and an old workbench, sat a weather-worn wooden box, its corners braced with metal, its lid sealed with clasps. On the side, nearly invisible under layers of dust and faded paint, were the ghost traces of military decals. The next morning, Jace showed up at the garage not because his truck broke down, but because something about May didn't sit right with him. The air had turned colder overnight, and the sky hung low with a stubborn grayness that flattened everything. Jace stood outside the open garage bay, with his hands in his jacket pockets, a small envelope tucked inside. May was already there, her back to him, hunched over the workbench with a wrench in hand and a mug of coffee balanced precariously beside a fant belt. He cleared his throat. She didn't look up. "Truck give out again." "No," he said, then stepped forward and held out the envelope. "Just thought I'd bring you this." She glanced at it, then at him, and wiped her hand on a rag before taking it. When she opened it and saw the gift card to Patty's porch, her eyes narrowed only slightly, but it was enough. "I don't need this," she said, handing it back. "It's not much, just coffee. You needed help, that's all." He hesitated, the envelope hovering between them like an apology that wasn't landing right. "Yeah, well, most folks would take a thank you." May didn't respond. She turned back to her workbench and tightened something with practiced calm. Jace stared at her a moment longer, then tucked the envelope back into his pocket. At Patty's porch, the red booths were fuller than usual. Locals leaned in close over steaming mugs while holiday wreaths were being pinned above the windows. Small American flags lined the counter beside the pie carousel. On the jukebox, Kenny Rogers crooned something nostalgic. Jace dropped into his usual seat and didn't order. Patty, sharp-eyed as ever, brought over coffee without asking. Mrs. Green slid into the booth across from him, with a smile that said she already knew too much. "You back already?" she asked, adding cream to her own cup without invitation. Jace nodded. "Just saw May again." Mrs. Green gave a small laugh. "She's still fixing things, yeah. She's the kind who gives quiet and takes nothing." He stared at his mug, unsure how to reply. May wasn't what he expected. People like that didn't just exist, kind for no reason, strong without boasting. It unsettled him, like hearing a melody you swore was in a dream. Across town, Cassie Holloway clicked through slides on her laptop, trying to explain to the principal of Elkhorn West Elementary why the Veterans Day Assembly this year might be short one major component, a veteran willing to speak. "I've asked the VFW guys. They're all either traveling or politely declining," she said, adjusting her scarf. "I thought maybe someone under the radar, someone quiet, might be willing." The principal offered a tight smile. "Good luck with that." Later that evening, back at their shared rental house, Cassie brought it up over leftover lasagna. "You remember that woman who fixed your truck?" "May, yeah," Jace said, mouth full. "Refused a gift card. Cold as a spark plug." She's got something about her, Cassie said. I think she might have served. Jace raised an eyebrow. She's a mechanic, not a Marine. And how do you know that she challenged? I mean, she didn't mention it. Doesn't mean it's not true. She stood and grabbed her coat. I'm gonna stop by. See if she'll talk to the kids. Jace didn't argue, but he did glance out the window as she left, wondering why he couldn't shake the image of the box with those faded decals. May's garage was dim, but not unfriendly. It smelled of old wood oil and something comforting like cedar. Cassie knocked gently before stepping in. May was adjusting a belt on an old lawnmower. She looked up, but didn't smile. I'm Cassie, she said quickly. Jace's sister. I teach 5th grade over at Elkhorn West. May nodded once. I'm helping organize our Veterans Day ceremony. We haven't had much luck finding a speaker and, well, I thought of you. May didn't reply immediately. She set the tool down and reached for her thermos. Cassie continued. I know it's short notice and you don't know me, but the kids would really benefit from. Some uniforms should stay folded. May said, her voice quiet but firm. Cassie froze. May didn't elaborate. She turned back to her work, gently guiding a bolt into place. Cassie swallowed her reply. Okay, she said softly. Thanks for letting me ask. As she turned to go, her eye caught on a shelf above the bench, just behind an old wrench partially hidden by a tin of bolts. It was a photo, dusty but intact. In it, a younger May stood in uniform, beside a tall man, both smiling, beneath an American flag, wind lifting the edge of her cap. Cassie couldn't stop thinking about that photograph, and how May's eyes seemed to harden when she asked about it. The image had lodged itself in her thoughts like a splinter, quiet, small, and impossible to ignore. The black and white photo tucked behind that wrench had not been meant for display. May hadn't spoken a word about it, but the smile in the picture was unmistakably hers, just decades younger, standing in uniform, beside a man whose hand rested protectively on her shoulder. The backdrop of the American flag had been faded, but proud. November 6th came with a dry breeze that carried hints of winter fluttering the flags outside Elkhorn's town hall. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from railings and paper poppies bloomed in elementary classroom windows. Veterans Day was just 5 days away, but it already felt like something was building. Not just the event, but something quieter under the skin of the town itself. Cassie left school after morning assembly and headed straight for the Historical Society, a repurposed brick building that smelled like old paper and varnished pine. Inside, she found Hal Whitaker in his usual seat by the bulletin board, a newspaper folded neatly on his lap, and a cane leaning beside his chair. Mr. Whitaker, she said gently, can I ask you something about May Keller? Hal raised an eyebrow. Keller, huh? What's she done now? Patched a tractor with a sewing kit, Cassie chuckled, then lowered her voice. Did she serve in the military? Hal's eyes didn't change, but his hands stilled. Back in the 80s, he said slowly, I remember a gal stationed at Ramstein, aircraft mechanic, kept a Huey in the air with half a toolkit and spit. He looked at Cassie. That her? Cassie nodded. He gave a small shake of his head, half admiring, half somber. Didn't say much even back then. But when she worked, even the birds held still. Outside the garage, Jace hesitated with a bag of bolts in one hand. He hadn't planned to stop by, not really, but something had pulled him here. Maybe the coffee hadn't hit yet. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. The same kind that made people slow down at construction sites or glance at lit windows in the dark. Inside, May was tightening a belt on a rusted engine block. Her hands were stained and steady. She didn't look up when he stepped in. "You're back," she said. "I brought those bolts you said were stripped." She wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, then nodded toward a crate. "Put them there." Jace did as told, then lingered. "You always work this much?" he asked. May didn't answer right away. "Work keeps the hands busy. And the head, that too." He almost asked about the box, the decals, the flag, the photo, but he stopped. Something about her stillness warned him off. Instead, he found a broom and began sweeping the corner of the garage without being asked. Cassie arrived just as he was finishing carrying a paper envelope decorated with colored pencil drawings, stars, planes, the words "thank you" in uneven letters. "These are from my students," she told May, handing the envelope over. "Letters to veterans." May took it gently, but didn't open it. Cassie stepped aside, eyes drifting across the workshop. On a shelf tucked between an oil can and a box of washers, she spotted it, a display case simple and glass-fronted, with a folded uniform inside. Beneath the pressed creases rested a silver star medal, its ribbon faded but unmistakable. Cassie stared. A breath caught in her throat. "May," she said quietly, "that's yours." May's face remained unreadable. "That was a long time ago." Jace looked from one to the other, but said nothing. Cassie finally turned to her brother. Her voice was low, firm. "You were wrong about her," she said. "So was I." Jace didn't argue. Later that night, Cassie sat at her desk with the student letters spread across her lap. One read, "Dear veteran, I hope you feel proud. You kept us safe and fixed things." She folded it carefully and placed it on top of the pile, then opened a fresh envelope and began writing by hand. It was addressed to no one in particular. Just May Keller. For November 11th. Cassie plans a surprise tribute for May at the school ceremony without telling her. The truth had been quietly waiting in a folded uniform, a dusty medal, and the silence May wore like armor. On the morning of November 8th, the clouds sat low and unmoving over Elkhorn. The wind carried a sharpness that hinted at frost, and fallen leaves rattled along the sidewalks like dry bones. In the town square, volunteers strung up banners for the upcoming Veterans Day ceremony. Children's drawings flapped gently on a bulletin board near the post office, and someone had chalked "Thank You, Heroes" in wide looping letters near the steps of Town Hall. Inside the Historical Society, Cassie met Hal Whitaker once more. The old veteran tapped a frame hanging behind the reception desk, a collage of photos from Elkhorn's history. "See that," he said, pointing to a grainy photo of a young woman standing beside a Chinook helicopter, sleeves rolled, eyes hidden behind aviator glasses. "Ramstein 85. That woman fixed engines with one hand and calmed scared boys with the other." Cassie leaned in. "She ever talk about it? Not once." Hal smiled faintly. "But she brought every chopper home. That says more." Down the street, Jace slowed as he passed the town hall. A folding table had been set up outside with laminated photos arranged in neat rows, men in crisp dress blues, women in desert fatigues, black and white portraits of World War II vets now long gone. A volunteer pinned a new addition to the display. Jace stopped. Their second-row center frame was May. The photo was clearer than he expected. She stood with a wrench slung over one shoulder, her uniform sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair pulled back in a braid. The Chinook behind her gleamed under a Middle Eastern sun, and despite the grime on her hands, she smiled just slightly, like she didn't know the camera was there. Jace blinked, surprised by the sudden tightness in his chest. That afternoon, he returned to the garage with a cardboard box tucked under one arm. He found May where she always was, kneeling beside a rusted lawnmower, sleeves pushed up, grease smudged across one cheek like a badge. She looked up as he stepped in. "I brought something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. He opened the box, a complete set of chrome-finished socket wrenches, polished and new. "They're not vintage or anything," he added quickly. "Just thought you might like 'em." She said nothing for a long moment, then reached out, running her hand over the tools, like checking for weight and balance. Finally, she nodded and murmured, "They'll hold under pressure." He smiled. "Thought you'd say that." That evening, May locked the garage later than usual. The sun had long dipped behind the diner, casting the workshop in a golden hush. As she stepped onto her porch, her eyes caught something at her feet. An envelope, no address, no stamp, just her name in neat handwriting. Inside, a single card. "We want to say thank you. Please join us at Elkhorn West Elementary on November 11th. No speeches required, just presence." May stood still a long time, reading the words twice, then again. She didn't toss it, didn't tuck it away in a drawer. She stepped inside, placed the envelope beside the photo of her late husband on the mantel, and whispered, "He'd have told me to go." The next morning, Patty's porch was humming with quiet conversation. The usual crowd nursed coffee refills, and someone had queued up John Michael Montgomery's Letters from Home on the radio. Near the front window, Cassie looked up as the door swung open. May stepped inside. She wore a clean denim shirt, her hair freshly combed and pulled back. She paused just a second at the threshold before walking toward the counter. "Mind if I sit near the window today?" she asked, voice soft but steady. A high schooler near the register opened the stool beside him without a word. Someone else held the door open behind her for a second longer. And from the booth in the back, a child waved shyly, eyes wide with recognition. Jace, seated at the counter, looked over and gave her a quiet nod. May sat, folded her hands in her lap, and for the first time in years, simply let herself be seen. Veterans Day was 2 days away, but in Elkhorn something had already shifted. People looked at May differently now. The town had slipped into its small but proud rhythm of preparation. Lampposts wore flags like scarves. Children rehearsed the national anthem in classrooms that smelled of crayons and glue. Outside May's garage, someone had planted miniature American flags in the gravel without saying a word. May had found them that morning, 5 in total, spaced like sentinels. Inside the school, Cassie stood before a corkboard covered in construction paper. The students had drawn tanks, helicopters, and stick figures in uniform, but also something new. A woman with a ponytail fixing a truck, stars overhead, and a label beneath the crayon lines that read Ms. May. That afternoon, Cassie arrived at the garage with a sheet of notebook paper folded neatly into thirds. She held it out to May, who accepted it with careful hands. "It's from one of my students," Cassie said. "They were supposed to write to a veteran they'd never met. He chose you." May unfolded the paper. The handwriting was large, uneven, and full of honesty. "Dear Ms. May, I want to fix things like you do. I want to be quiet and brave too." She didn't say anything for a while. She just looked down at the page until her hands stilled and her shoulders eased. Jace arrived later, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the diner. He set one beside her workbench without speaking and watched her tinker with the edge of a carburetor. "Busy day?" he asked. May gave a small grunt. "More flags than engines lately." He leaned against the wall. "I quit my job last year. Omaha. Digital marketing." She glanced up. "Sat in a cube, moved pixels around for 12 hours. Never saw what I built." May returned to her tools but didn't interrupt. "I don't miss the work," he said, "but I miss feeling useful." She handed him a socket wrench. He blinked. "You want me to Third bolt under the mower deck, she said. Turn, don't yank. He crouched beside her and began loosening the bolt. His movements were clumsy, but careful. She didn't correct him. As they worked, she murmured, "It's not the machine, it's the hands that count." He looked at her then, not just as someone who had helped him once, but someone he was learning from. When the mower rattled to life again, he grinned. May allowed a small nod. Later that evening, in the quiet glow of the garage's single overhead light, Cassie returned with a small bouquet. The flowers were pressed between wax paper and twine lilacs, and tiny wild asters the students had collected during recess. "They picked them for you," she said. May took the bundle, inhaled gently, and blinked more than once. She didn't speak. In the privacy of her home, May opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside lay her husband's service journal, its cover cracked but still soft at the edges. She opened to a page marked with his handwriting, "Honor lives quiet. Just do the work." She slipped a photo of him creased, smiling into the pocket of her coat. Down at Patty's porch, the evening crowd noticed the change. "Did you see Ms. Keller at the garage today?" one man asked. "She had lipstick on," Mrs. Green chuckled from behind the counter. "Careful, boys. That woman's fixed more than engines in this town." Back at the garage, as the sun dipped and the lights in the school auditorium flickered on in the distance, Cassie stepped onto the porch. The school bell rang faintly from downtown. "You still sure about tomorrow?" she asked. May looked up from her chair, hand resting lightly on the envelope Cassie had given her. "I'm sure enough." The Veterans Day ceremony began with a moment of silence, but ended with something far louder, the sound of lives reconnected. Sunlight pierced through the low gray clouds as the town of Elkhorn gathered in the school auditorium. It was standing room only. Folding chairs stretched in neat rows from wall to wall, their metal legs creaking under the weight of winter coats and anticipation. Students stood along the sides holding paper flags and pressed flowers in trembling hands. Cassie moved backstage, checking microphone wires, smoothing the hem of one child's dress, then wiping her eyes before the next cue. The air smelled of waxed floors and warm paper, and from the ceiling, speakers' soft instrumental hymns played under the hush of the crowd. At the back of the room, May stood beside a small honor guard. Her mechanic's jacket had been brushed clean, though a faint stain clung to the hem grease, permanent and honest. Pinned to the breast pocket was her husband's old service pin. She ran her thumb over it once before stepping forward. A second grader in a too-large blazer walked onto stage and read from a crumpled sheet, "Veterans, thank you for being brave when others couldn't. You make our town strong." The room stayed silent. A sniffle. A cough. Then the mayor stepped up to the podium, voice amplified through the aged sound system. "Today we honor many," he said. "But there is one among us who never asked for thanks, who never told her story. Until now." He turned slightly. "Ms. May Keller, would you join us?" A pause followed. May stepped onto the stage. The applause was hesitant at first, then swelling. People rose to their feet without prompting. From the front row, Cassie clasped her hands, eyes brimming. May took the microphone with both hands. No speech, just breath. "I served," she said, her voice steady. "My husband didn't come back. But I came back. To fix things." She stepped aside. Jace stood next, fidgeting with a folded index card in his pocket. He didn't look at this crowd as he spoke. "She fixed my truck," he said, voice shaking. "But more than that, she reminded me to show up. Not just for repairs, but for people." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held meaning. One by one, children walked on stage and handed May a gift, a flag crafted from construction paper, its stars drawn in silver ink. Around its border were their names. Some had scrawled, "Thank you, Ms. May," or "Hero plus wrench is you." She accepted it with both hands. Then, from a bag at her feet, she pulled out something older. The original flag, folded, worn. May unfolded it carefully. Hands that once lifted rotors, replaced bearings, soothed trembling shoulders, now smoothed the creases from cloth heavy with memory. She draped it over the podium. She nodded once, and the crowd stood again. Weeks passed. In early December, a sign appeared over a small converted garage near the diner Keller and Son. Honest repairs. Inside, sunlight poured through the front windows. The walls bore pegboards with neatly hung tools. Along the back wall, framed in walnut and glass, was a photo of May in uniform, grease on her hands, smiling faintly toward the camera. On opening day, Patty delivered coffee in person. "Veterans drink free," she declared, sliding a mug into May's hand. May chuckled and sat by the window. Jace poured himself a cup, then lifted the pot toward her. "Refill." She nodded. "Don't mind if I do." A child pressed their nose to the glass and whispered, "She's a hero, but she fixes things too." Inside, the radio played a slow tune. And in that quiet Elkhorn morning, surrounded by mugs, memory, and machines, the story folded into something whole again. Some heroes don't wear capes or make speeches. Sometimes they just hand you a wrench and stay a while. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories once told not in speeches, but in actions and folded flags. May never asked to be seen yet in helping others. She reminded a town and a young man what it means to truly show up. Kindness, after all, needs no ceremony. It waits patiently behind garage doors and warm mugs of coffee. Like a porch light left on after dark, one simple gesture can guide someone home. And if this story stirred something in you, maybe it's time to pass that light along.